Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome to another live stream. It's been a couple of weeks, of course, since the last one. Sorry, I realized my little thing that I used to track that we're going live over here is kicking off. So it's great. Thanks so much. So many people already there. So what I thought I would do is, since we're going to be talking about Antarctica, I thought what I'd actually do is work through the questions and slowly sort of tell you the story of Antarctica and the different issues and great things and things to think about based on the questions. Of course, there will be a couple of videos to come from that, some of which are already being edited, some which I've written scripts and need to be recorded. So welcome to this sort of special episode on Antarctica. Lots of regular faces here, some very kind comments saying that Saturday wasn't the same. So that here, so Saturday wasn't the same without the live stream. So that's fantastic. Great, good to know. So as I said, I'll stick and start with the questions. One thing I'd like to say, of course, is the videos are coming over the next couple of weeks or so. If you do want to get more of an insight around what happened, one of the things you could do is I posted stories on YouTube. So I don't know if you ever watch stories on YouTube, but normally you can find this if you go to the channel page, Tips for Travelers. You'll see there's a little icon with my face, a little avatar, I guess it's called, and you should be able to watch the stories. Some of them won't all be there. So the other option you can do if you want to see lots and lots of pictures of Antarctica and little video clips of Antarctica on my Instagram page. So if you're an Instagrammer, if you go to Gary Bembridge, that's my Instagram, and you'll see just on my profile page, there's Antarctica 1, Antarctica 2, and you'll see loads and loads and loads of little video clips around Antarctica. So hopefully that will help meantime. So let's get into the questions. John saying, my wife and I are attentively watching because this time next week, we will have just boarded Silversea's Silver Explorer on King George Island. We anxiously look forward to your insights. So John, I actually saw Silver Explorer when we were actually in Porto Williams. We were refueling after crossing Drake's Passage before we went to Ashaya, and actually the Silver Explorer was selling out. So I have a couple of video clips. I guess they were heading down to look at the solar eclipse. So very exciting, great time of the year to be going. And I'll maybe talk a little bit later about the different times of year, etc., to be going. Lou was one of the persons who was following and watching on Instagram. So again, just remember about that Instagram. So let's get into one of the, one I think is probably one of the key questions around going to Antarctica, which Piper Nile asks, which is, could you tell us about the differences between visiting the South Georgia Islands versus the more common stops in Antarctica? And I will absolutely talk about this because this is absolutely, I think, critical if you're going to Antarctica. So sorry, John, if this is different to your schedule. But basically, I went to Antarctica in 2019 on Silver Cloud, and I did the classic 10-night trip, which is what most Antarctica trips are, which is going to the Antarctic Peninsula. So you fly, you go out of Ushuaia, you cross the Drake's Passage for 1.5 to 2 days, depending on how rough it is. You then spend time in the Antarctic Peninsula. You don't go that far south, actually, because the ships don't really go that far south. One of the things you learn is you go to such a tiny little segment of Antarctica in the peninsula, and then they sail back, normally via South Shetlands, to Ushuaia again, allowing up to 2 days for Drake Passage. Now, when I went to Antarctica, I did that, and it was absolutely amazing. You get to see the incredible scenery, you see lots of glaciers, you see lots of snow, and you do see some wildlife. So you will see some Gentoo penguins, because Gentoo is the main type of penguin species down there. This is very important, which I'll come to second if you want to see different species of penguins. So you will see Gentoo penguins. You may see some chinstrap penguins, but mostly you see Gentoo penguins. You will get to see, hopefully, leopard seals down there. You might see some Weddell seals as well. Leopard seals basically feast on penguins. They eat up to 20 penguins a day. And you will get to see, depending on the time of the year, whales. So we did actually see some whales. We saw humpback whales. We saw killer whales, orcas, which I discovered on this trip are not whales at all. They're dolphins. They're part of the dolphins family. But if you go later in the year, like February, when I went last time, we saw many, many more whales. But on that classic trip, you're going to mostly see beautiful scenery, incredible scenery, mostly snow, mostly glaciers, mostly ice, and a limited amount of wildlife. Now, if you want to see much more wildlife, head and include South Georgia in your trip. Now, I originally booked this trip. It's a longer trip. This trip was 18 nights. Originally, it was going to be a little bit longer when I booked it for 2020. And it called on South Georgia. It called on South Orkneys. We actually went to some other islands along the way, Danger Islands and Plano Island, and not Plano Island, I've got the name of the island, embarrassingly, and then headed on to Antarctica Peninsula and South Shetlands. Now, South Georgia is ram-packed full of animals, absolutely phenomenal. And one of my big goals have been to actually get off in Salisbury Plain, which is one of the most renowned places. So in Salisbury Plain, you have 400,000 king penguins. So 200,000 breeding pairs. We went to a few other places. We actually went to 4 stops in South Georgia. We went to another place, for example, Gold Harbor, which I think had 200,000 king penguins. But also in those places, there were myriads. I mean, I think in Gold Harbor, there was probably 100 elephant seals, the big, massive, big seals, both males and females. And there was probably about the same number of Antarctica seals, Antarctic fur seals. So South Georgia is jam-packed full of animals. So if you really want to see a lot of wildlife, you need to include South Georgia. It is just phenomenal. Scenery is a little bit different. It's not quite as snow-covered and icy-covered. Then also, if you head off to that South Orkneys and some of the other islands, you also get to see Adelie penguins. We actually bizarrely saw an emperor penguin, which is extremely unusual because emperor penguins are much more down south, but they do travel, of course, hundreds and hundreds of miles. So you will see just so many more animals. And if you're particularly a bird lover, you will see many more birds as well. So I would say absolutely, if you're going to Antarctica, seriously, absolutely consider including South Georgia. It was phenomenal. Again, if you want to go to Instagram or whatever, and you'll see just the scale of it. Now, bear in mind, there are rules supposedly around how far you stay away from animals. So you're supposed to stay 15 feet from penguins, 45 feet from Antarctic fur seals, 75 feet from elephant seals, because elephant seals are a little bit more bulgy. It is absolutely and totally impossible to do that. First of all, because there are so many animals around. And secondly, because the animals in Antarctica have no mainland predators. So they have no real concern about people. Of course, people went there at the turn of the century and massacred basically all the seals, massacred most of the whales, but they've now rebuilt back up. So they have no real fear of man. So actually the penguins are a little bit inquisitive, certainly the young seals inquisitive, they keep coming up to you. So if you look there, and you'll see eventually in my videos, people kept asking me what camera I was using. A lot of what I was showing on Instagram, in fact, all of what I was showing on Instagram was on my iPhone. Penguins were literally like, 3 feet, 2 feet away from you. So just normal. So sorry, it's a long way of answering the question, but phenomenally, I would say, if you're going to Antarctica, if you plan to go to Antarctica, I would strongly recommend considering an itinerary that includes South Georgia. It was totally believable. Bob, that's probably answered your question. Saw the great pics and clips of penguins on Facebook. Did you see anything up close? So we saw, as I mentioned, elephant seals up close. We saw Antarctic fur seals, and because of the time of the year, we saw young ones. You'll see in the penguins, we saw the various different types of penguins, as I've already mentioned. We saw lots of birds. And interesting, again, the birds, if you're a real bird fan, the birds, again, very comfortable walking, just sit there as you walk by. So if you're a big bird fan, so we saw most of the seals. We saw different types of seals. We saw Weddell seals, as I mentioned. We saw Antarctic fur seals and so on. So loads and loads and loads of stuff. So Bob also asking the question around, sorry, Bob, another question. That question. How did protocol affect your flights and hotels? So I'm just checking. I like to just check to make sure everything's running smoothly. So Bob, how did the COVID protocols affect your flights, hotels, and cruise? So of course, as we know, traveling at the moment is challenging. Obviously, Omicron, I keep calling it Omnicon, but Omicron, of course, sort of blew up whilst I was away. So basically, the protocols were pretty much as one would expect. There is an enormous amount of paperwork and documentation you have to do. So, I was flying into Uruguay, it's the same into Argentina. We flew out of Argentina. You had to do all sorts of documentation beforehand and get a special QR code. You obviously had to do PCR tests, both to get into Uruguay, you had to be fully vaccinated. They're only taking both Argentina and Uruguay. So if you're going to Antarctica, you have to be fully vaccinated within a certain time limit as well. So Uruguay was 9 months. I think the same true in Argentina. And they're talking about reducing those. So increasingly, if you're looking to go to Argentina, you will probably have to look very carefully at how long it was since you had your vaccine. And so, for example, in Uruguay, boosters are very prevalent. So increasingly, you're probably going to have the booster jab because the timeline is quite short. On the ship, we had to wear masks at all times, unless, of course, seated. We had to wear them in the theatre when we were having lectures, for example. The ship was only half full. It can take 200 passengers. We had 104 passengers. And talking to other people and other cruise lines, I think we've seen the ships generally being quite empty, more because people aren't booking than anything else. So coming back into Argentina, we had to do documentation again on the ship to generate QR codes. Because I was flying via Madrid, I had to generate and submit a lot of stuff to get codes for that. I submitted a passenger locator form to go back to the UK. So it's relatively kind of complicated. Now, the Wi-Fi was actually pretty good on the ship most of the time, except once you got a little bit south in the peninsula. So we were able to do a lot of that. So it was pretty complicated. Getting on the ship, social distancing was fairly easy to do, because it was half capacity. So the usual kind of things. So Andy and Kirsten, a couple of people asked me questions about the cold. So I'll probably see some more questions on the cold. So I'll come to that in a second. I'm just going to take a little slug of, as you can see, Harry Potter fan, controversially in Ravensclaw. So Andy and Kirsten, good to see you. Andy and Kirsten, by the way, have a YouTube channel where they've been posting lots of the trips they were doing during the end of shutdown. So lots of stuff on P&O and Iona and stuff like that. So how cold was it while you were there? So Antarctica in the summer, because obviously we go in the summer, is not massively cold in theory. So it's not as cold as you think it is. However, the wind chill factor does make it much colder. So the temperatures that were being recorded as the daily temperatures would range from a warm 0 degrees down to about -7. However, when you were out and about, it was colder because the wind, of course, is coming off the ice and the glaciers, so it can feel a little bit colder. However, other than my face, which did look a little bit at times like someone had been slapping me when we came back, because you're going to go out for 2 hours or an hour and a half, either on the Zodiacs or out on land hiking. But you basically have the gear. So you wear layers, and it is phenomenal. So I actually got various videos, in fact, old videos I've got of me. If you watch my Instagram, you'll see me go stripping down to literally my complete briefs. So you have a base layer, which is basically kind of, I guess, long johns and that level, like a sweat top kind of thing, which is, that sort of material, wicking sort of material. You then put over sort of an insulating layer. So I would wear over that, for example, jeans. I would then wear like a jumper, quite a warm jumper, and then like have a little zippy top. Again, not massively thick, but they hold the heat in. Very thick socks. You've got to wear thick socks. Then you wear undergloves and then overgloves. The overgloves are more, so they're waterproof. I often would just wear the undergloves because I could then take pictures. You then have to wear like a neck warmer goodie. They said not a scarf, because scarves can blow off, and people are very sensitive about stuff like blowing off. Big thick hats. You might see I have really tea cozy type hats with no hair, but you do need something with your hat and ears. And then the ship gives you a big parka. You'll see in all the videos these big red parkas, same one as on Silversea. And then you have to wear boots. So quite high boots, which come up to just under your knee, because when you go out in the Zodiacs, there's no jetty. So you basically step off the Zodiacs into the water. So, you need to have those. And that basically keeps you warm. So literally this bit of your face is exposed, and I would come back kind of really red and just from the wind. So actually, although it was really cold, I didn't feel cold. In fact, since I've been back in London, got back in London a couple of days ago, I went out last night, I felt colder then because you don't have all of those layers. But the temperatures were sort of -7 to 0. And once you get into the middle of December time, peak of summer, they kind of hover very much around 0, so not massively cold. So William, we have a 14-day February Crystal Endeavour trip to plan for. Welcome back. So that's great. We actually saw I actually saw the Crystal ship because I guess it was doing its first Antarctica. And when we were actually, we'd just been doing some whale watching stuff. We just see some orcas, and we were actually parked, moored, hovering, watching some orcas. And I saw the Crystal Endeavour ship in the distance, because you don't normally see that, but they didn't stop to look at the orcas, interestingly enough. So let's have a look. John, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning. John's asking which light. So I just saw a question on temperatures. Good point. Those are in Celsius. So very good point. In Celsius, I guess in Fahrenheit that would be even colder. So those were temperatures in Celsius. So from 32, I guess, to whatever. I don't know what would be in Celsius. Sorry, I should have said that. So John was asking on which line I sailed and specific ships. So that's good. I want to talk a little bit about that because that's quite an interesting one. So as I mentioned before, I went on Silver Sea, and I really liked Silver Sea. I thought they had great service and nice ships. The ships are a little bit older than many of these new ships coming along. So the ships were a little bit older, but have a lot of character. Of course, being Silver Sea, they're really nice done up inside, great food, and really good expedition team. Now, the reason I went on the cruise line I did is because they did the very specific itinerary. So coming back to that point I said about, where to go. So I chose, when I came back from my first trip, I wanted to go to, I did the Falklands, but that fell off the itinerary because the trip I booked when it was rescheduled dropped the Falklands. But I wanted to go to South Georgia very specifically, the South Orkneys I wanted to go to, and so on. So the cruise line that was doing that at the right time and so on was Ponant, and they were offering it with La Lyriale ship, one of their, what they call their sister ships. So they have, I think I can't remember the name, so I won't even try. So La Lyriale, which goes down there quite frequently. A little aside on La Lyriale, we were on as Ponant, but pretty much a lot of the Ponant team got off. So the expedition team got off, the cruise directors, etc., got off, entertainment all got off, because after that first 3-week cruise, it's then taken over by Abercrombie and Kent, who then chartered through to the end of January. So all the people going on the Lyriale ship will be going as Abercrombie and Kent. So Ponant, it's a French cruise line, and over 80% of the passengers were French. There was about 20 English speakers, 15 of which were actually from one group. It was a group of Taiwanese Chinese who all live in the USA, been traveling together for 20, 30 years. Then there was another 2 American couples traveling. There was another US couple, and me. So the one thing I would say is, I chose Ponant knowing it was French. So obviously it's most of the people you interact with, certainly, in terms of reception, hotel, that sort of stuff, were French. Most of the other crew, so the housekeeping, most of the waiters, they were actually Filipino. So actually, as an English speaker, those are the people who are, of course, most comfortable with English. So being on a French line, it was very French focused. So, French, I mean, I didn't feel like a second-class citizen. That's probably not true, but, it was a French line which was catering for English speaking. So things were adapted. We'd got an English language program. We'd only go out on the Zodiacs with the other English speakers. So our group was all English. They would do the lectures and briefing in English for English only, and they do a separate group for French. So it's definitely, but the food was very French focused. So if you go on that line, you need to be very comfortable that you're on a French line which is going to cater for English. So it's a very different mindset, particularly, and I think I would say probably some Americans found it less comfortable because they kind of felt, well, actually, sometimes they felt, the captain might be, when it was multilingual or bilingual sessions, say with the captain's briefing, they felt the captain would talk for 5 minutes in French, but in 1 minute in English to summarize. So, but that's the nature of being for online. So that was what I was on, but you could go on that same ship with all English speaking as Abercrombie and Kent. Yes, cruise carriers don't count. It was very interesting, Lou, because one of the things I was worried about is, on an expedition cruise, it's very, very full on. I'd forgotten actually how full on it is, because you're often woken up in the morning, 7:30, because your first Zodiacs are going out at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, it's full on, from early in the morning. I think the latest morning we had, actually, on some of the crossings, we didn't have early mornings, but when we were actually in the territory, as it were, I think the latest we went out was 8:30, the first group went out. So you're up early in the morning and it's full on. And then you're going off, you're landing and you've got 2.5 hours to hike up these big hills and hike back down, or so it's actually it's pretty tiring, pretty full on. So anyway, so I was kind of worried that with this trip I'd put on loads of weight, but actually I didn't, because I did manage to do a couple of cycle classes on the sea days. I didn't on the Drake crossing because it was so rough, and I think I would have fallen off the bicycle. I did it on one day, but we had a true kind of Drake Passage crossing, and when you see the videos, I'll guess you'll show some of the videos. Waves kind of crashing over the front of the ship and wobbling around and stuff like that. I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. A lot of people were a bit more seasick than I realized some people on the first 4 days, because we had 4 sea days to South Georgia, and it was quite rough because it's big open sea and lots of wind. And I discovered lots of people spent 4 days basically in their cabin, but then people learned about things like the patches and stuff. And so I think on the Drake Passage, there's probably more people around, but it was pretty a true Drake Passage crossing. I may as well do pump. If you want one of these t-shirts, by the way, I do have t-shirts. Normally below my videos, you'll see links to a little merchandise store. That wasn't the point of wearing this. I just like to wear cruise related, but I have shirts like this available if you want to. In fact, I've got a new shirt listed, I think, there as well. So John again saying about very, very exciting. I mean, the Silver Explorer, I would say, is a great ship. It's a little ship. I can't remember. It's really small. It's like 120, if I remember. Passengers, quite small. And Silver Explorer was a ship that I did my first expedition cruise on to the Arctic, which was phenomenal. So it's a really nice, really nice ship. So William saying the funny thing is no one ever mentions what the temperatures are other than cold. That's probably a good point. I think once you get to that degree, it's just cold. So if you go out, even if if you're sailing through and you see, like when you're whale watching, for example, you just know that you need to put on your your big coat, you need to put on your hat. Sometimes when we're whale watching, I would put on some of the underlayers because you're going to be standing out on the deck for an hour or two, and it's just cold. I think you're right. It's just cold. So you're right. Oh, okay, Roy. So let me talk a little bit about that. It's a good question. Is this cruise offered in summer? Well, it's offered in the southern hemisphere summer. So summer in Antarctica, basically the first ship starts sailing. We were one of the first ships down there. I think one ship had maybe beaten us down there. So the season really starts around about November. So southern hemisphere summer, when the ice is kind of opened enough that ships can go in. So even sometimes in November, it can be risky because there may be a lot of ice. So, for example, there was only one place we really couldn't get into, which was through Lemonnier channel, which is a beautiful channel, which I went through in February, but we couldn't get through because it was blocked by ice. And we couldn't get into Plano Bay because there was too much ice. But other than that, we managed to get around the ice. So it starts in November and it really ends into February. Now, some run into March, but it starts to get, the ice really starts building. So really November, December, January, February, and December, January is the peak season for it. So it's only offered in that time for a very short space of time. And again, as I mentioned, it only really goes to a very small part of Antarctica. It goes to a tiny little part, which is the little peninsula part. So hopefully that does. Now you can also you can go to the more southern part of Antarctica out of Australia. I guess you can't at the moment, and New Zealand, because they're not letting ships in. But there is some stuff that sails there. Although talking to people, what they're saying is there's less to see around that part of Antarctica down in the south. So it depends. So it's coldest in our summer. So it's coldest in the northern hemisphere summer months, because of course that's their winter. So then it gets to minus 30, 40, whatever degrees Celsius. So in our summer, it's their winter kind of things. So Gentoo penguins, a local council is called Gentoo. That's kind of interesting. Gentoo penguins. Just going back to the penguin point. So when the first time I went to Antarctica, because I was so excited to see penguins, and we saw what I thought was a lot of penguins. But once you go to South Georgia and even South Orkneys, and you see these massive penguin colonies, you realize actually the colonies in the Antarctic Peninsula are tiny by comparison. We went to what's called the Danger Islands, which is sort of between South Georgia and South Orkney, and there is 1 million Gentoo penguins across these little tiny islands. I mean, they're literally rammed in. And that's when you just realize the kind of the scale of some of these really big ones. But so you've got Gentoo. So I saw Gentoos, Adelie penguins, king penguins, and as mentioned, we saw that one emperor penguin, which is very unusual. So emperor penguins are much more subviginous. They're down the south of Antarctica. So you've got the Antarctic Peninsula. I should do the other way around because you reversed it. So Antarctic Peninsula is kind of this side, and then you have Antarctica. So it's a bit like a thumb. So Antarctica, because of the mirror imaging, I'm doing it the wrong way around. So there we go. So Antarctic Peninsula sticks up towards South America part. And basically, the emperor penguins are much further down the bottom. So I guess potentially you could see, if you do from the Australian side, you could see the more likely to see emperor penguins. So, for example, one of the expedition team had actually been I don't know what it was called now, like a base leader on one of the Australian research bases there, which is right down the south, and there was an emperor penguin colony just behind this. So that's really where you see the emperor penguins, is around that. There's a little bit around the bottom, so they're right down the bottom. Emperor penguins, by the way, are the biggest penguins I discovered, and then king penguins are the second biggest. So that's kind of that's interesting to know. So let's have a look. A couple of people saying they followed it on Instagram, so that's great to me. Let me answer this question. So quite a few people asked me this, so let me just take another slug of tea. So Jimmy asking, did you see the solar eclipse? No, we didn't, because solar eclipse I think was on the 3rd, and I got off the ship on the 30th. So we got off the ship in Shire on the 30th. Then we flew to Buenos Aires, which was included in the flight. And the trip officially ended in Buenos Aires. It was like a charter flight, although it ended up being actually on a scheduled line. But anyway, so no, we didn't. So the Silver Explorer that I was mentioning a little bit earlier, we saw going out of Puerto Williams in Chile, that was heading down to look at the solar eclipse. One of the things that I guess is really important to note is that this time of year, particularly when you get to Antarctic Peninsula, it doesn't really get dark. So one of the things that is really important to pack, particularly I've forgotten who the name of the person who was going down is, make sure you pack eye shades because it's light. And it's a little bit confusing because you kind of wake up and you think, oh, is it morning? And you realize it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, this is a great point because this is something that troubles a lot of people. So Moonman 547, can you speak to risk versus reward to someone who's worried about the seas coming and going to Antarctica? So there's one way around it where I think Silver Sea are doing a bit where you can fly onto Antarctica. For me, that's missing part of the thrill of it, but maybe I'm lucky because I don't get seasick. Touch wood, I've never been seasick. So risk versus reward. Drake Passage is a lottery. It can be Drake Lake, as they call it, or Drake Shake, and it can be anywhere between those. And it's not set by any time of the year. It just depends on the wind and so on. So I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, and people I spoke to said this, is going to Antarctica and seeing what you see and experiencing what you're experiencing is worth it, even if you are as sick as a dog for 2 days there and 2 days back. Now, the good news is, depending on the sea, although they allow 2 days, sometimes it can be less. So when I crossed with Silver Sea, they had 2 days allowed. We were there after a day and a bit. We saw our first big icebergs before lunch, and by that afternoon, the second day, we were out already exploring. So it depends a little bit on how bad the Drake Passage is. I spoke to a couple of that I was talking about the Taiwanese Chinese group. Many of them had been kind of seasick. Most of them hadn't really thought about seasick tablets and things, but they had said without a shadow of a doubt, even though they had been really seasick, what they saw way made being seasick perfectly fine. Now, what I noticed, if you're worried about being seasick, is a couple of things. One of which is I always look at what the crew do, and almost all of the crew are wearing the patches. Now, they are patches which have a release system in them, and I think it was Phenergan or one of the active ingredients. So I noticed most of the crew, both senior crew and also kind of the waiting staff and whatever, they were using patches. the little behind the ear patch. So I would say if you're concerned about it, the patch is what people who do it regularly seem to be using. So that's definitely worth looking at. You know, I know there's some side effects, make your mouth very dry and whatever, but and I know there was one of the couples I met, both of them had said on the, or sort of one of them had on that first 4 days it felt pretty rough, and then it got the patch I think on the second day, and then they were kind of fine. They got the patch because there was, you could get them from the medical center. They charged for them in the medical center, and then he was perfectly fine for the Drake Passage, which was much rougher. So just be prepared, I think. And again, if you are worried about that, the whole thing about being midship. So for example, my cabin was midship, so I was actually up on deck 6, which was the top deck. There's actually deck 7 where they store things like the Zodiacs and things. But basically, I was on the top deck. I was in the middle of the ship, and you know, I've had movement and stuff. But when I would go to the observation lounge, which is on the same floor as me, on the same deck as me, you know, you'd be like the buffet restaurant, which was also on the same floor as me. Again, they actually closed that for most of the sea days because they decided it was too rough, you know, to do anything. So you only had a lot of the meals down on deck 2. So, you know, go down low and go midships is again another tip. But I think, to your point, Moonman 547, what you see way outweighs that, and then just you know, just be ready. Victoria, hopefully I've answered your question already in terms of the coping with the cold and the layers. Hopefully that's answered that. So you are, to Jan's point, you know, you are a very long way from land. You got to bear in mind, it's 1,000 kilometers. Was it 1,000 miles? 1,000 kilometers from Ushuaia to the start of the peninsula. So you are a very, very long way away from land, and there's just a lot of sea. You know, so but it's just amazing. Seriously, it is absolutely amazing. You know, when I went the first time, people sent me these messages about, you know, trip of a lifetime. I was like, this is too magnificent to be a trip of a lifetime, and I wanted to go back and do South Georgia. I'm kind of, I would happily go back to Antarctica again at some point, and not that far away, because the reason also, and this is a point that was made by one of the expedition leader. There was 14 by the way in the expedition teams here, you know, geologists and historians and marine experts and whale experts and all that sort of stuff. But the point he made is, you know, he's been doing expedition cruises for 12 years, and what he says is he has never been on any trip that is the same, because you're driven by the weather, you're driven by the ice, you're driven by where you can land, where you can't land. If there's any issues, like sometimes you might not be able to land because there's too much ice or whatever. So every trip is different. So every experience is different. So on this trip, there was 2 places we went to that were the same as on my previous trip, which was Necker Harbor and Paradise Harbor. But everywhere else we landed and stuff was different. So it was a very different experience. So that's again why going. So I got a little bit distracted. A couple of questions about the US, which I'll come back to. I was going to keep. Here we go. So Lou's asking, because this is actually a good point, Lou, because a lot of people ask me this and I forget to talk about this. So did Ponant supply all your heavy clothes, and were they included in the fare for you to keep or just use while on board? So really important. Great question. So I'll ask for Ponant specifically and tell you what other lines do. So the short answer to the question is no. All that they provided were 2 things, one of which is the parka. And they want everyone to wear the same. First of all, they want to know that you're protected. And they want everyone to wear the same parka because it's bright red, and everyone's wearing the same thing, so they can see from the ship or from land where everybody is. So everyone who was passenger wore a red one. Everyone who was crew wore a blue one. So that was how you kind of differentiate. But they could see very easily in these areas who's who. What they did provide, which you could hire, although I'm not sure they actually charge anyone for them, is the boots. So you don't have to take the boots. Now, I had actually bought boots from my original Arctic trip, which I know I can walk in and are comfortable. So I took my own boots, even though they're quite heavy. So those are only 2 things they provide. Now, Silversea, for example, Lou, they provide the parka, and they also provide a rucksack, although it wasn't particularly waterproof rucksack. So it's a nice rucksack, but it wasn't that waterproof, so it wasn't that great. What Silversea do, which other lines do, so for example, I think Hurtigruten do, and a few other lines that I've looked at, is they all have a store where you can order your stuff. And often they'll be delivered to the ship, so you don't have to take it all with you. So all the gear that I got, the undergear, the overgear, the boots, the gloves, the net thing, all that stuff, we originally ordered when we went on the Arctic trip through the Silver Sea store, and we got it when we got on board the ship. Ponant have a store, but it doesn't get delivered to the ship. I think I'm right in saying the Tweety it gets delivered to the ship. And I was looking at Quark, but I can't remember. So every line has a slightly different thing, but no, you have to buy it. But a lot of the lines will offer boot rental. So I know when I went on the Arctic with Silver Sea, they didn't offer boot rental, but by the time they went to Antarctica, the last time you could have rented the boots. But I didn't want to do that again. So Nora asking, I get this asked a lot, Nora, do you need a personal assistant to travel with you? Love looking at the blogs. It would be great if you have an assistant doing lots of filming, make my life much easier. But anyway, so Ravensclaw is your favorite house. That's good to know. But you must, it's not always the most popular, but there you go. Okay, so let's keep going. I know there's a couple of questions which are not about Antarctica, and I will come back to those before we wrap up. So, enjoys learning and travel. Great name that. Do you need to climb a long way by skis to get to the place you can watch the penguins and other animals? Really enjoy your channel. Good, thanks for that. So, no, you don't. So you don't need to use skis at all, but you do need to be pretty fit and certainly quite mobile, fairly mobile. But for instance, in many of these places, if you weren't that mobile and didn't want to climb up the hills, often you would find on the beach area or the landing, there would be a lot of penguins, seals. Certainly in South Georgia, you know, there'd be. I mean, when we got off the Zodiac, you know, there was a bunch of penguins there. There were seals there. You know, you kind of had to weave your way around, you know, to actually go to the little area, get briefed where you go. So no, you don't. Now, if you want to go up and see some of the, you know, some of the bigger colonies and things, you might have to do a bit of walking up a hill. Now, you'll see if you watch the Instagram stuff and eventually in my videos, some of those hills are pretty high. You're talking about 40, 50 meters high. What's that in feet? I guess 50, I don't know, 150 feet high or whatever. And some of them are quite steep, of course, there's lots of ice and snow. So that's what I'm saying, you need to be quite mobile. So a lot of people did bring those Nordic walking sticks. A lot of people had those. They sold them in the shop as well. So you do need to be relatively, I mean, I would be really hot. So people ask about how you do the cold. I mean, by the time you climb up the hill, you're really hot because you've got all this stuff sealing all the heat in. And of course, you're getting really hot going up the hills, but you don't need skis at all. And you can get to see down. So if you're not that mobile, you can see stuff around you when you land. But if you want to see some of the amazing stuff, you know, so for example, in I think it wasn't Gold Harbor, it was, but you know, you climb up this hill to then look down on 200,000 penguins. You know, if you want to get shots like that or see things like that, you know, you needed to be a little bit more nimble. So hopefully that answers the question. It was Celsius, not Fahrenheit. I probably should brush up on my Fahrenheit. So here's a question around how did you manage a camera with all those gloves? Piper and Niall, basically, as I think I mentioned earlier, you have the undergloves, these like thinner gloves, and then the big stocky gloves. So I would mostly wear the thin gloves, even when I was walking around. Only if it was really snowy or cold, I'd put the thick ones on. Certainly on the Zodiacs, I would often put the thick ones on because you can get quite wet. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention with clothes, you have to have waterproof trousers. Big miss. I forgot to mention that completely in the clothes. You have to have waterproof trousers. So because you're going to get splashed when you go on the Zodiacs when you step on the water. So sorry. One key piece of clothing I forgot to mention is waterproof trousers. So anyway, so I'd have those off to then do those and be able to use my camera. So with the phone, it's kind of annoying because they weren't always screen friendly, so you have to squeeze them off and quickly push them and put them back on. But it was kind of fun. Those thin gloves do keep you quite warm, certainly for taking pictures and stuff like that. Emmett M. McAdams, thank you very much for the super chat. I've may have missed it, but what was the worst weather you cruised in, and what was the best room you stayed in on a cruise? So, so linked to the Antarctica, question as well. So, I would say the worst weather I think was probably the Drake Passage crossing. Although it's hard to tell because you're on a smaller, much smaller ship. I have been on winter crossings on both the QE2 and Queen Mary 2 on the North Atlantic in the winter, which is pretty rough. So it's hard to know because you're a much bigger ship. But certainly in terms of kind of movement and stuff, coming back on Drake's Passage, I would say was probably the worst, just because you were kind of close to that. In terms of the best cabin, I actually had a very nice cabin on this ship. I managed I got upgraded on the ship, which was very nice, and that was a very nice cabin. The best one I've ever stayed in, I would actually say, is many years ago, just after Mark and I got married, we were on we're doing a thing, and we got upgraded on Queen Mary 2 into one of their penthouse suites on Queen Mary 2. That probably was the best cabin. But the one I was on now was pretty special. And again, I posted some of that on the Instagram stuff. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it in my videos, so I probably didn't do that much videos. I ended up videoing very little of the ship and so much of the experience. So let's go. Sorry, I got slightly distracted. Great. So I answered lots of the questions on Instagram. So it's great, Sydney. Thanks for watching the Instagram stuff. Glad I answered many of the questions. Linked both, I guess, to general cruising north of Antarctica. If you need diabetic food or lactose-free food, should you tell the cruise company before you get onto the ship? I would always advise that, most cruise lines are now used to dealing with all that, but I think particularly on any cruise, and particularly going on an expedition cruise, I would have that discussion, make sure the cruise line are aware of it, and also when you get on board, is asked to speak to the maitre d', who, depending on the size, may actually get you to talk to the chef. But if you've got any things, I would definitely have that discussion, particularly on an expedition cruise, although they can cater for all types. I mean, there was lots, people had various restrictions of diet and stuff, and that was being catered for, but it's definitely worth doing that. Something else, also about solo. So great example, I'm traveling to Antarctica solo with Ponant in February for 3 weeks. Fantastic. After your cruise with Ponant, do you have any specific tips for me that would help me enjoy that long cruise alone? Okay, so this is an interesting, because I was also traveling on this cruise solo. So let me have another slug. And I'm not sure which ship you're on, whether you're on one of the like L'Irial or you're on the new Commandant Charcot ship or whatever, but I think it's true of any of them. So one of the things that surprised me, to be honest, a great example, is that I think there was only one other solo traveler on the ship, which kind of surprised me, because you may have chose Ponant for this reason, but Ponant have really good solo travel deals for their expedition cruises. So I think I paid 15%, I think 20% surcharge, maybe something that was quite low. And also then Silversea, the reason I went on Silversea is because Mark didn't want to go to Antarctica, and also because it was too much time, he didn't want to go, was the Silversea, I think, was 20% surcharge. So quite good surcharge on those two cruise lines. Not all of them have that. So that may be the reason. So I actually expected there to be more, in particular the cruise I was on, because not all cruises have that low single supplement. So there was very few solo travelers. So I think the first thing I would say is probably expect there to be not that many solo travelers. The second thing I would then say is, if I'm guessing, certainly unless you're English speaking, is because English speakers will be the minority, I'm guessing because you're going Ponant rather than Abercrombie and Kent, is very quickly you're going to get to know who the other English speakers are, because you will start having separate briefings, etc. You will be going on the same excursion, so you'll always be going out with that group. Like we had 20, which was split across 2 Zodiacs. Zodiacs take 10 people, so you just get put on the Zodiac, and that's how you're going to meet people through the briefings. They're going to know the English speaking on the Zodiacs, on the outings. You're going to eventually build a little bond with those people and get to know them, and then I think the one thing that people were almost frustrated about, which is probably exaggerating it, is because there were so few English speakers, people were frustrated they didn't get to meet more people. So I found the English speakers were often saying, come and join us for dinner, at breakfast, you go in and say, oh, come and join us for breakfast. So that, you started getting to know. So I got to know the other English speakers pretty well. Some of them became really friendly. I think some of them, I know, were going off doing things on some of the post trip things. They were meeting up for dinner and stuff, even after the trip. So I think that key thing is you're going to get to meet people really quickly, and you're going to mix with them really quickly, and just join them for dinner when you go exploring on land. Walk with them. I'm in so many. Those of you saw stuff on Instagram. that group kind of co-opted me into their group and would insist that I was in their group photos. They insist on taking pictures of me. So you find they kind of bond, because you do bond a lot on that expedition cruise. If you want to do your own thing, you can do that as well. So I often like to just, because I wanted to sort out all the videos and whatever, and I didn't want to have big long dinners, I'd often just eat in the buffet restaurant, and I would just go in and have my dinner quickly by myself and out. The one thing I would say on Penant is if you eat in the main dining room, the main dining room is not as comfortable eating by yourself. So I did it a couple of times just because I wanted to be quick. But because it's French and it's a 5-course menu and whatever, it's quite a slow process. So if you're going to eat in the main dining room, I would suggest say to some of the English speakers, "Can I join you for dinner?" Because the crew clearly think you're a little bit loopy. I'm exaggerating again, but they did keep saying, "Are you by yourself here?" Like at the table, they're not used to solo travelers eating by themselves in the main dining room. Upstairs, Eric, if you're on La Liriel, Eric will be the maitre d' in the restaurant. He was fantastic. He had a little table for me. The crew there were fantastic in that restaurant. So those would be my key tips. But certainly going solo. Anyone else thinking of going solo to Antarctic? It's fun. I've done 2 solo trips into the Antarctic. I did the Arctic with Mark. So not solo, but it's because it's such a bonding experience. It's very easy, and the ships are small. It's very easy to travel solo. I think quite a few people have answered the diabetic question. William, is it okay to bring your own boots? Absolutely, 100%. I brought my own boots. A lot of people just don't bring them because they don't want to spend the money because they're going on an expedition cruise once. They don't want to buy their own boots. I wanted to bring my own boots, even though they were quite heavy. And I actually took even a bigger suitcase. Got a bigger suitcase than I normally take because I wanted to take my own boots because I know I can walk. Even spending 2 hours walking around on land, and I want to make sure that they were ones that I liked and were comfortable. One of the things that's really interesting, though, what you'll have to do with all of your clothes in Antarctica, as a little aside, is you have to, under the various rules in Antarctica, you have a gear check. So you have to take everything, and they have to be checked before you go on land. And the boots, you do a good old scrub and check there's no bits of fluff or hair or whatever in. So you do that, particularly if you bring your own boots, and all external clothes. So those waterproof trousers, measuring, they go and check all of the Velcro, all of the pockets. Obviously, the first time you because the park is brand new, they check all the hat. You have to vacuum all that to make sure there's no bits of seeds or anything that you're going to transfer in between. First of all, bring from the west into the first port of call, and then between some of the islands, we would have those checks again. When you come back off a landing, you have to scrub your boots and make sure that they're all kind of pristine, and they'll do that with your own boots. Kathleen asking the question, what are the names of your Instagram and Facebook pages? So Kathleen, the names are, I'll tell you the names, but the other way, easy way to find them is below, not on actually on the live stream, because I should probably put it there, but certainly on all of my videos. If you're looking at, if you look at the description, which I guess hardly anyone looks at our description, but certainly in the description section underneath, I've got links to both my Instagram and my Facebook there. So if that's another easy way of finding it. But basically, my Instagram is Gary Bembridge, and my Facebook is Tips for Travelers. So it's the name of the channel. But again, you'll find links, as I say, look in the descriptions. Maybe I'll try and add it to this live stream as well. Actually, I'll add it to the live stream at the end as well. So yeah, I think that's a point. Raven saying, fellow Canadians and I might not consider it really very cold. I mean, that was the point a couple of you made. It's like, oh, I'm in Michigan, I think it was, or that's not that cold. So you're right. It's probably not. So there you go. A lot of people are saying, yeah, I wouldn't consider that cold. So it's really the wind. It's the wind chill that makes it feel much colder, particularly when you're standing out on deck, while watching. Robert asked a question. A lot of people ask this, so let me answer this question. What does the smell like from so many penguins? Robert, really interesting, because I thought it was going to be absolutely terrible, but it wasn't actually that bad. And a lot of it depends on the way the wind's blowing, I suspect. The same with the noise, because basically you've got 200,000, 400,000 penguins. And what I learned is when the penguins, because they basically, where we're there, they were nesting, so they'd all lay their eggs, and the male and the female partner would take turns, like incubating the eggs, and then one will go out, feeding, and then when they come back, and also, so that was one lot. The other lot is you've got the chicks, which you'll see in the videos, either on Instagram or later, or YouTube stories, when my full videos come out, you'll see these really brown, fluffy penguins, and those are the chicks from last year. So they kind of last year they then molt, then they look like penguins, and they go out and do their own feeding and stuff. But basically, these penguins can sometimes be quite far away, as I've mentioned, where they are, and when the penguins come out the water, they start looking, they start squawking, and that they all recognize each other's squawk. So it's quite loud. Depending on the way the wind's blowing, is either loud or not loud. So the smell is very distinctive, and you really certainly got enough in Saltry Plain, which was the first stop. And it's like, wow, this is a very distinctive smell, which I felt like I had in my nose for the rest of the day. But it's not as strong as you think it is, surprisingly. Now, we're at the beginning of the season, admittedly, where all these penguins have arrived, and they're basically out at sea for the winter. They only come back to land to start nesting. So they'd only been there a couple of weeks, so maybe by the end of the season. But I don't remember being that bad at the end of the season. So it's not as bad as you think it would be, but it's relatively strong. These cute little colored creatures, and I guess the smell is a little bit of a disconnect. So M. Anderson asking, how was the nearly 24 hours of sunshine on the reflective snow ice versus Alaska 24 hours sunshine with exposed mountain and trees? Now, I have been in Alaska, I guess, when it's been light. I've been in the Arctic when it's basically all light. It was bright. It felt bright, I guess, because it is reflecting off much more. And certainly, yeah, it was very bright. And people kept making the point about, so although you can see stars, it's still pretty, because the reflection is pretty bright. So it was definitely very bright. I mean, I found, for example, they do say bring sunglasses. Certainly when you're out in the day, when you're out, you need sunglasses because of the reflection. So it was pretty bright. I just can't remember, trying to remember the Alaska thing. So, but bright, definitely bright. Here we go. This is the point John was saying. This is the point about the flight. So the flight, the Antarctic bridge, which so that's why they're avoiding the Drake Passage. So that was the option. Here's another thing. United Flyer. Good to see you here. So what is the dress code around the ship and evening dinner? Buenos Aires will be hot and it'll be cold. What clothes take? Really interesting. So when I went on Silversea, because I've been on Silversea before, and as I knew the dress wouldn't be that fussy on the dress code when I went on previous expedition cruises. Now, when I got all the Penant information, which we actually got quite late, because I went on the 10th, and it was only confirmed that Uruguay and Argentina were opening on the 1st, and so it was really kind of late notice. But anyway, there was quite a lot in the document around the dress code on Penant. They spoke about smart casual, no jeans, collared shirts, on gala nights, formal nights, suit and tie, jacket and tie. Then there was a white night. There was a lot of stuff about dress code, and I was like, oh, really, on an expedition cruise? People going to be that fussed? But I was like, eventually, okay, I better take it. So I took my suit with me. I took my white shirt for the white night. I got a tie. Didn't wear it. People didn't pay attention to the dress code, and the ship didn't enforce it. You're on an expedition cruise, and to your point is, take the clothes that you need for the expedition. So what I took was all that gear I mentioned, the layers, really, really important. I then basically took enough clothes for a week. I was there on the ship for 3 weeks. So I took in a couple of long sleeve shirts for the evening, a couple of polo shirts, some sort of thicker shirts like this, 2 pairs of jeans, and that, some stuff to go to the gym. And you're right, because when I said, we left Ushuaia, and I think it was 7 degrees Celsius. We got to Buenos Aires and it was 28 degrees. So in my suitcase, I packed my coat and that sort of stuff. So basically, like any cruise, put out what you're going to take and reduce it. On the ship, you can basically wear jeans, polo shirt, long sleeve shirt. I mean, even on formal nights, some people would wear sort of more slacks type of stuff, but definitely dress code no one was that fussed about the dress code, either on the ship or the passengers. So that was key. I think boots would have to be curated to ensure. Yeah, so they would be. I mean, obviously kind of new, but you're right. They are really, 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 really particular about that stuff. They're providing parka boots, waterproof pants, and poles, all without rental fees. So that's interesting. The parka you get to keep. That's right. But certainly, that's good to know that they're including those. They used to have those as a rental. Maybe they've now just bundled that all into the fare, which does make it easy because that's a lot of stuff. To bring, but certainly a most of the lines you need to bring in. So I guess the key learning is you absolutely need to check. I'm very envious of you, John, going off again to Antarctica. So let's have a look. Someone else saying Silver Sea provided the same on the Antarctic Cruise. So good to know that. So again, check what is included. So this is a question a lot of people actually ask me as well. So another interesting point is, without being able to restock along the way, were there any issues with food by the end of the trip? So the point being is, we were sailing for 18 days. So you think they needed, we covered 3,000 nautical miles or something, a huge amount of distance. So they had to have all the fuel. They had to have fuel for the Zodiacs. They had to have enough food. No, I didn't really notice any difference between the food at the beginning, food at the end. So, we were having, because I guess ships have learned this whole system where they bring like vegetables and fruit. So I was still eating fresh fruit salad at the end, exactly the same as the beginning. And if you ever do, one of the things I've always recommended, those behind the scene tours, which I guess during COVID have stopped, but if they ever start up again, they're worth doing. Where they explain a lot around how ships have this sort of phased stuff like vegetables and foods, which basically will ripen over periods of time and be ready over periods of time. So no, there was no real difference. The menus were still as elaborate. The food was, I didn't really notice any differences in the food at all. But it's a question a lot of people ask me, and I hadn't really thought about it before. But it's a point of no, I didn't really see. Okay, so this is another key point: is did we see anyone living and working there? Expedition personnel, scientists. So let me just cover a couple of points in that, Patrick. There are no permanent residents in Antarctica at all. Antarctica isn't even a sovereign state. It's basically run by treaty, governed by treaty. So no one actually owns any part of Antarctica, although the British, the Australians have claims on certain parts and they call it certain territories, but they're not really recognized. So no one permanently lives there. It has no sovereignty. In summer, there are about 4,000 people working in the various bases, research bases. There's 80 or 82. It's roughly, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 80 different bases spread out all around Antarctica. There's 4,000 people work on them during the season. Most of those, of course, being scientists. Of course, then you have support personnel, plumbers and carpenters and chefs and all that kind of stuff. In winter, it goes down to around about 1,000 people. Now, when I went in 2019, we actually went to visit one of the bases, which you used to do. With COVID, you can't visit any of the bases now. So most of the bases that we saw had no personnel on them because they only were bringing personnel in December, and they, because that's the peak of the summer. So we saw a couple of bases, but we didn't see any people at all. In terms of the expedition personnel, they're all on board the ship, so they all work specifically for the cruise line. So we did see a couple of bases. All the bases, as I said, had nobody on them. And now the question I asked, which I need to follow up, is whether any of those bases actually opened during the last season because of COVID, whether they actually didn't bring any scientists and stuff down, which I didn't actually find the answer out to you. So Visionist has asked the question, do you think it would be worth booking the bigger suites on board, even though they're in places that suffer from the most movement? Now, I'm not sure if you're talking specifically about expedition or generally speaking. Interesting enough, what L'Irial does, they have all their biggest ones on deck 6. And I did talk to someone who was in the front of them on deck 5 and deck 6, and they were like, oh my God, they're all over the place. It's like moving a lot. So I think lots of it depends on whether your approach to movement and worrying about seasickness and stuff. If you slightly bit worried about that, stay in the middle. I think the point you're raising is very interesting, is that suites tend to be in the areas with a lot of movement. They tend to be on the back of the ship, they tend to be in the front of the ship, whether it's an expedition ship or otherwise. And I met a marine architect once who said cruise lines and passengers expect suites to be there, but actually it's not where he would put suites. He would put suites on about deck 7 on the ship, midships, because that's where you're going to have the greatest ride of all. So I think it really depends on how important it being in a suite is to you, and whether you want the idea of being in the front of the ship or the back of the ship, and whether you're worried about sickness or whatever. So I'm going to have a quick squiz because we're about to run out of time. And I want to see, I did say I would come back to the US trip, so I will quickly, someone asked me some questions. I'll see if I can find those, because I did say I would come back to the the US trips. Someone spoke about protocols in US trips. Here we go, Bruce. We just finished an 11-day cruise on the new Rotterdam. It looks very nice. Other tourists from other ships are not with any mask protocols. And you're right, it varies a lot. The protocols vary a lot. It's going to be very interesting. I'm going in January to the Caribbean, on Holland America, on New Amsterdam, and I'm not sure what the protocols are entirely, other than, you know, we have to have the COVID test 48 hours before the PCR test or whatever before, and we have to have the vaccination. So I haven't seen the mask one, but you're right, the varying rules based on what's going on. We had the mask rule, absolutely. So there was another US question which I feel I have missed. So hopefully I've answered most of the questions. You know, we've run out of time. This hour goes. Thanks very much to everyone who's joined. I really, really, really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully I've answered lots of questions, and hopefully in the videos to come, I will answer many more of those questions around the whole Antarctica. Sunday, tomorrow, of course, there'll be a new video out. This one is going to be a little bit about Princess Cruises. Not a little bit, it's going to be about Princess Cruises and some of the issues that I had with being on Princess Cruises and what my thinking on Princess Cruises moving forward. So have a look at for that. But for everybody else, have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll see you next Saturday. There will be another live stream next Saturday, and then we'll talk about potentially being a bit of a break, because I'm then traveling again to the US, and I'll figure out if we're going to do that or not. So have a great time. Have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks very much for joining. And if you are cruising between them, really safe, happy cruising.